This video is brought to you by ESPN Plus. Sign up at the link below, get a 7-day free trial, and watch the fights this weekend for free.
As much as we love MMA for showcasing the world's greatest martial arts and entertaining fans with thrilling fights, there's no getting away from the fact that MMA is ultimately still prize fighting. And when there are large amounts of money and fame involved for the victors, corruption is sure to follow. Combine this with the fact that MMA and pro wrestling have a tendency to occasionally cross over, it's no surprise that MMA has some questionable fights scattered through its brief history. I'm Tom from MMA On Point, and this is 10 allegedly fixed fights in MMA. Number 10, Kazushi Sakuraba vs Kimo Leopoldo. The more you watch Kazushi Sakuraba vs Kimo Leopoldo at Japanese event Shootboxing S Cup 1996, the more clear it becomes that this fight was a work in some fashion. This bout was early in both men's careers and was in fact the legendary Sakuraba's MMA debut that came in the midst of a pro wrestling career. Leopoldo definitely landed some legitimate strikes early on in the bout, including a few headbutts to the back of Sakuraba's head. Leopoldo also had a significant weight advantage in this bout. However, it is clear that Sakuraba wasn't fully resisting his opponent in the grappling exchanges and certainly does not resemble the fighter who would go on to hand hoist Gracie his first defeat. In fact, Sakuraba only attempts one single strike in the entire bout, despite having other opportunities to do so. Leopoldo also had excellent chances to land devastating ground and pound, however he too decided to ditch the striking almost completely as the fight went on. The finish itself was also unusual, an arm triangle choke from half guard that caused Sakuraba to tap. Sakuraba wouldn't actually be submitted in MMA for another 14 years, despite facing the greatest submission artists in MMA history. There is just an accumulation of unusual aspects to this fight that makes it seem not entirely legitimate. Even Big John McCarthy himself stated this fight was a work in his book. Let's get it on. Number 9, Dan Severn vs Shannon Rich. UFC Hall of Famer Dan Severn met MMA veteran Shannon Rich in July of 2005 at the inaugural event of new promotion Extreme Wars X1.
You son of a bitch.
It was their second meeting as the two fought just a month prior, with Severn coming out victorious via submission. The bout took place in Honolulu and was a complete work throughout the entire contest. Round 1 featured some gentle wrestling with minimal strikes being thrown. Severn also comically throws Rich across the ring on 2 occasions in the first round, and it's just clear that this isn't a true competitive fight. To make matters worse, Severn reacts in bizarre fashion to a seemingly weak leg kick by throwing both hands down to the canvas as if to suggest the leg kick almost knocked the much heavier Severn off his feet. Rich then threw a high kick which sent Severn scattering across the ring in an overdramatic fashion. And as Severn was approaching 50, many presumed he just wanted to make some easy cash off the back of his popular name in MMA. However, you'd expect someone who was signed with the WWF to sell a fight better than Severn did. Number 8, Satoshi Ishii vs Yuri Prohaska. 2008 Judo Olympic gold medalist Satoshi Ishii featured in a suspicious looking bout against Yuri Prohaska at Ryzen FC's first ever event. The bout took place in the opening round of a heavyweight Grand Prix where the victor would walk home with a prize of $300,000. During the bout, Prohaska, who currently holds a 23-3-1 record, went about his business in a seemingly normal manner. However, it was Ishii who appears to have taken a dive early on in the fight. Prohaska throws a high kick but slips as his leg becomes fully extended. Closer inspection shows the kick only partially lands on the elbow of Ishii, which doesn't appear to be a strike worthy of causing any considerable damage. Yet Ishii drops to the ground anyway. Ishii then scrambles back to his feet and is dropped again by Prohaska, who took no prisoners regardless of any fight fixing, as he lands 2 legitimately powerful knees to finish the fight. Number 7, Nobuhiko Takada vs Carl Sturgeon. Prior to his MMA career, Nobuhiko Takada was an extraordinarily popular Japanese professional wrestling star, regularly drawing in crowds of 60,000 plus in the mid-90s. Takada headlined Pride FC's first ever event against Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu phenom Rickson Gracie, despite having little to no fighting experience. Rickson would comfortably win the bout, and Japanese fans were disheartened after seeing their biggest star dominated so easily. In order to rebuild his somewhat damaged reputation, Takada returned to headline Pride 3 in a clearly fixed bout against unknown debuting kickboxer Carl Sturgeon. The bout opens up with Takada flinging himself across the ring in response to Sturgeon's high kicks, before Takada would submit Sturgeon with a heel hook, much to the Japanese crowd's delight. And this bout was Sturgeon's one and only MMA fight, if you needed any more confirmation. The plan prevailed, however, as Rickson would rematch Takada at Pride 4, saying Takada is a warrior and deserved the chance to redeem himself. Rickson would win the rematch, but the 2 bouts between Takada and Rickson are heavily attributed to the early success of Pride. Number 6, Dom Fry vs Mark Hall. The bout between Dom Fry and Mark Hall took place at the strangely named UFC tournament UFC Ultimate in 1996. It was the third time Fry and Hall would compete against one another, with the UFC Hall of Famer Dom Fry winning the first two in convincing fashion after wearing out his opponent. Before their semi-final bout took place, Tank Abbott had already advanced to the final with relative ease, accumulating less than 5 minutes of octagon time in 2 bouts. However, Fry's first bout continued for over 11 minutes, and therefore fatigue was a concern for him and his team. With this in mind, Robert DiPergia, who was the manager of both Hall and Fry, convinced Hall to throw the fight. According to Hall, DiPergia explained that they wanted to keep Fry fresh for the final, and given that Fry had already defeated Hall twice, there seemed like little reason to make Fry work for an inevitable third victory. During the bout, Hall seemingly gave the dominant top wrestler Fry an Achilles lock and tapped out in just 20 seconds, despite their previous bouts going over 15 minutes combined. Fry would go on to defeat Abbott in the final and win the tournament, but coincidentally, this tournament was the last time either Dom Fry or Mark Hall stepped foot in the UFC octagon ever again. Number 5, Rafael Torre vs Ioka Tianu. If you're familiar with the story Joe Rogan told about Eddie Bravo confronting a fake black belt who later ended up committing murder, you won't be surprised to hear he also fought in a fixed MMA fight too. In MMA's early days, Rafael Torre gained popularity on online forums after bragging about his 14-0 record and BJJ black belt, which no one could disprove. Torre was invited to compete in the prestigious BJJ tournament ADCC, where he was submitted with extreme ease in the first round. Torre then made what appears to be his only official MMA bout against his former teammate Ioka Tianu, despite claiming to have a 14-0 record. The bout took place at King of the Cage 7, with Torre picking up a submission win. However, people were suspicious of this bout, and years later Joe Rogan broke down and highlighted moments to show it was a fix, including the finishing sequence, which featured a wrongly applied knee bar. It was later revealed that this fixed bout wasn't the only lie in Torres' life. His real name is in fact Ralph Bartel, and he had never held a BJJ black belt or a 14-0 professional MMA record. Number 4, Alexander Emelianenko vs Eddie BENGTSSON. Although never confirmed, the bout between Alexander Emelianenko and Eddie BENGTSSON at Pro FC is perhaps the clearest case of a fighter taking a dive in MMA. Emelianenko entered the 2010 bout on the back of a 6-fight winning streak, whilst opponent BENGTSSON, who wrestled in the 2000 and 2004 Summer Olympics, held a 3-1 professional MMA record. After successfully defending a takedown, Emelianenko threw the first punch of the fight, which was a range-finding jab that wasn't thrown with any intent to end the fight. However, it did just that. The jab barely touched the nose of BENGTSSON, yet the Swedish fighter took a few steps backwards and collapsed onto the canvas. Emelianenko then stood bewildered, with his opponent trying to work out what had just happened. BENGTSSON remained on the floor for over a minute and all but certainly pretended to be unconscious, with an Oscar-level acting performance. Presumably, BENGTSSON took a dive to receive his paycheck and avoid any real punishment from Emelianenko, who had been legitimately knocking people out in his prior fights. Number 3, Guy Mezger vs Kazushi Sakuraba. Not all fixed fights are necessarily coordinated by the fighters, and Guy Mezger vs Kazushi Sakuraba is a prime example of this. Their bout took place in the opening round of the Pride 2000 Grand Prix in a 15-minute, one-round contest, or so it seemed. Despite accepting the fight on just 2 weeks' notice and with a reported broken foot, Mezger stuffed the majority of Sakuraba's takedowns and got the better of the striking exchanges. Therefore, Mezger presumed he would edge the judges' scorecards and move on in the tournament. However, the fight was declared a draw, and suddenly an extra round was announced to determine an outright winner. Mezger attributes this to the fact that Pride wanted their Japanese star Sakuraba to advance to the tournament and offered him an extra round as another opportunity to defeat Mezger. During the confusion, Mezger's cornerman, none other than Ken Shamrock, was visibly furious at what Pride were trying, especially given Mezger had taken the fight on short notice. Mezger fled the ring under Shamrock's instructions, and the fight was awarded to Sakuraba due to forfeit. In the following round, Sakuraba defeated Hoist Gracie in what is one of the most iconic bouts in MMA history that may have never happened had Pride judges rightfully awarded Mezger the decision. Number 2, Oleg Taktarov vs Anthony Macias. Nowadays, we almost never see single night tournaments in MMA. However, the UFC and many other organizations were built on evenings when only one man would walk out the lone victor. In these tournaments, fighters were often forced to pull out after taking damage in the early rounds, and Oleg Taktarov and Anthony Macias' manager Buddy Albin wanted to bypass this problem. During the semi-final bout at UFC 6, Muay Thai fighter Macias immediately shot for a takedown and Takada wrapped up an easy guillotine choke for the submission victory. To this day, the 9-second finish remains the fastest submission in UFC history. However, after the bout, you can clearly see Macias looking ashamed with his head down whilst Takada gives him the evil eye whilst Macias all but gave Takada the victory. Macias spoke out years later in an interview with Boxing Insider, saying their mutual manager Buddy Albin blackmailed Macias into throwing the fight. According to Macias, Albin said they had a substantial amount of money riding on Takada for winning the tournament and said he wouldn't allow Macias to fight again if he tried to make the bout competitive. The plan worked for Albin, and a fresh Takada submitted Tank Abbott after 17 seconds to win the tournament. Up next we have an honourable mention: Tai Hung Bang vs Leo KUNTZ. Tai Hung Bang vs Leo KUNTZ is arguably the most high-profile story of fight fixing in MMA and led to the imprisonment of Tai Hung Bang. So why is it an honourable mention? Well, after UFC officials noticed a huge sway in the odds prior to the bout and warned Bang and KUNTZ there would be a personal investigation should one man not fight properly, and the fight ended up being a competitive encounter. Prior to the bout, Bang accepted a near $100,000 bribe to throw the bout. Bang bet half of the bribe money on his opponent, and Japanese mafia members had reportedly bet $1.7 million on KUNTZ to win. However, Bang would go on to win a split decision at UFC Fight Night 79, return the money, and receive death threats from the Japanese mafia, who can't have been best pleased at witnessing all that money go down the drain. Despite fighting fairly and winning the bout, Bang was sentenced to 10 months in prison in November of 2017 for originally accepting the bribe to throw the bout. And number 1, Mark Coleman vs Nobuhiko Takada. Although there is no shame in losing to Rickson Gracie, Takada's popularity in Japan was beginning to fade after being dominated by Rickson, and thus arguably the most famous case of fight fixing in MMA was born. Mark Coleman had a perfect introduction to MMA, winning tournaments at UFC 10 and 11 before winning the inaugural UFC heavyweight title. However, Coleman would fall on hard times before his fixed bout with Takada, losing 3 on the bounce in the UFC. Coleman was heavily favoured for his main event against Takada at Pride 5, not only being the superior fighter but also outweighing Takada by 40 pounds. However, the man often called the godfather of ground and pound was unable to land effectively whilst on top of Takada. During the bout, commentators Stephen Quadros and Bus Rutten voiced their confusion when Coleman jumps from side control into full guard and refuses to attempt a guard pass. Ultimately, Takada secured a heel hook on Coleman, who taps like a WWE superstar. When questioned about the fight in an interview with Bloody Elbow, Coleman stated it was what it was. I needed to support my family, they guaranteed me another fight after that, and I needed that security. It was what it was, which all but confirms this bout was a fix.
Hey guys, Jason from MMA On Point here. If you haven't signed up for ESPN Plus just yet, the folks at Disney have asked us to help promote the fight and a card to our viewers, which is a sentence I never thought I'd say before. And of course, I have no problem helping out since I'm pumped about this weekend's card. You can do a trial for 7 days, which means you won't have to pay a dime to watch Dillashaw versus Cejudo live, which no doubt is a pay-per-view worthy main event that's about $70 to pay for here in the US after all fees and charges are included. And yeah, we get a nice kickback if you all sign up using our custom link in the description. It would be a huge help to us. Also, if you are already planning on signing up and just haven't yet and want to help support our channel, that would be greatly appreciated as well.
Thanks so much to Charlie Howard, who scoured the internet to find these fixes and wrote this wonderful list. Go follow him at MMA_Charlie. And thanks so much to Tommy Welsh, who edited this list. Thanks for watching that video. Please do like and subscribe. We upload 3 jaw-droppingly juicy MMA videos a week to get your teeth into, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Make sure to follow us at On Point MMA and Tom A. Ransom on Twitter, and you make sure you have a great day.
MMA fighters are nearly superheroes when you think about it. They've trained their bodies to be faster, stronger, and more durable than most anyone else on the planet. They have hand-to-hand combat skills that are unrivaled, and with their understanding of grappling can make anyone they get a proper hold on unconscious or incapacitated in seconds. So it's no surprise that from time to time these living, breathing death machines will encounter a crime and use their powers not just for profit in the cage, but for the greater good. And today we're going to count down the 10 craziest and most unbelievable examples